Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast, the show that offers you tips and strategies to help speakers build the business of their dreams. Now here's your host, 30-year industry veteran and business coach, Jane Atkinson.
Well, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. I'm your host, Jane Atkinson, and today we're talking about podcasts, how to elevate and leverage your podcast and really expand your reach. My special guest is Traci DeForge. Welcome, Traci.
Hello, thank you. I'm excited to be here and talk about podcasting. Amazing.
That's what you do. And actually, in that same vein, tell everybody kind of what it is that you do, and you have your fingers in a few pies.
Yes. Okay. Well, great. Thank you for asking. So I founded a company about 9 years ago called Produce Your Podcast. And it pretty much says what it is. We produce your podcast. But I think what our biggest differentiator is that we work primarily with coaches, consultants, authors, speakers, business owners, marketing, CMOs, et cetera, who are leveraging the podcast as a growth tool for their business. There are a lot of different genres of podcasting out there. Our niche is to be able to create a really viable option for business growth as a catalyst, using the podcast as a catalyst. And the reason for that, for Produce Your Podcast, is because my background was 20 plus years in broadcast radio, and that involved managing. At one time, I was managing 12 different radio stations in the Atlanta area. Wow. And it was all different formats: rock, pop, country, news, talk, sports. So a lot of brand partnerships, a lot of just a lot of different experience in both the format of the audio medium along with business development strategy. And went on to do some consulting for Fortune 500s and startups. So when I wanted to start my own podcast, I looked around and there weren't a lot of full service agencies out there at the time, 2016. Right. And so since then, we've just grown exponentially. You mentioned I have my fingers in a lot of pies. So we are a full service podcast production, marketing and monetization agency. But I also have a podcast management academy for people who want to start a business in the podcast industry, but might not want their focal point to be on the mic, so to speak. And then I also co-founded the Podcast Professionals Association, which is the trade association for podcast service professionals. So I pretty much eat, breathe, and sleep podcasting.
Really do. So we're going to probably move into the assumption that the people most interested in this particular episode have their own podcasts already, but just really briefly, in case they don't, what would you say are the top 3 reasons that a professional speaker would want to have their own podcast?
Well, based on the fact that most speakers are subject matter experts in whatever it is that they are speaking on, and there can be gaps in between the time you're on a stage versus maybe doing a virtual event, or depending on what your business model is for your speaking business. So a podcast, the number one thing that a speaker can benefit from in terms of podcasting is to really enhance that opportunity for visibility around their subject matter expertise and their thought leadership. I often say that LinkedIn has now become the speakers bureau for finding speakers. And one of the things that, in terms of benefits, but also a marketing tip combined, is that if you have on your LinkedIn profile that you're a speaker, but you also host a podcast, then you're going to really up-level your opportunity in search to be found by people who are looking for speakers in your area of expertise. And that, I think, is the absolute number one. And then number 2 is that we all have to market ourselves now. We all have to, content creation is king. But it also can be very time consuming, and in some cases can be exhausting. So creating a podcast is a very highly efficient way to get more marketing content created for yourself. For example, we're recording this today, audio version, video version, then it can be transcribed, blog posts, social media posts, all of these things to really step up and record one time, invest 30, 45 minutes, and then you have an entire catalog of content, for example, that you can extend from that one investment of time and resources. So I would say that's number 2 for sure.
Beautiful.
And then number 3 is, again, as much as we're all marketing ourselves, no matter what business you're in, you are in sales to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not always a comfortable place for people to live. You might be a subject matter expert in an area where just never required you to actually, sell your business or sell your services. And a podcast opens up the opportunity for people to know, like, and trust you. They get to feel and hear what it would be like to work with you. So you're essentially creating your own sales tool without even having to cold call.
Yes.
And you can integrate a call to action to continue the conversation after the podcast. And that's your business development tool. So I would say those are your top 3 for sure.
I love that. And we'll talk more about that last one. I'm going to add a 4th one, is that you're constantly diving in. Now, a little caveat here, whatever you're speaking about needs to be what your podcast is about. Some people have done it just to play in another space because they want to, but the most effective way to do it, if you want to do it, is to pick a lane, stick in that lane for your podcast. Okay, so let's get that caveat out of the way. But I'm going to say this is also allows you for constant learning inside and play inside your area of expertise. You can bring on other people and compare notes. And I can't even tell you how much knowledge I have gathered over the years from my podcast guests. Like,
yes,
this will be one that I walk away with some great knowledge from. So I think it's amazing to be able to just really immerse yourself in that subject matter and go deep into it with your podcast. Okay, so you talk about integrating your podcast with your current audience. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I think it comes back a lot to what you were just saying in terms of if you're going to invest your time, your bandwidth, your resources into creating content in a podcast, then speak to the people that are ultimately you want to continue the conversation with and utilize that as a way to grow your audience, grow your following, but also grow your business. So, I mean, I'm piggybacking on what you were saying in terms of having a podcast is fun, and you can have in any way, shape, or form, you could have a podcast about something that is of interest to you and is exciting to you. But if you are going to utilize it as a growth vehicle, you really want to be able to make sure you're developing and building a show that integrates with the style of your personal brand, but also just speaks to what's in it for your audience. And I think that's often something that's really overlooked. We talked about the top 3 reasons just now. That's what's in it for the podcaster, right? But when you're talking to your audience, you really want to build and concept a show that's designed to entertain, educate, inspire, and motivate. And if you can connect with your audience on those 4 levels, then you have a leg up on any of your competitors that aren't doing a podcast, because you're building a really strong and intimate relationship with the people who are engaging with your content, especially the audio version. Because, like right now, I'm wearing AirPods. When most people consume audio content, they're portable, they are multitasking, they're doing other things, but it's the one platform where through this very tiny AirPod, however people are listening, that you're inviting them into your home, into your car, into your gym, into your laundry room. And that is a psychologically intimate connection with a virtual stranger that then becomes a really significant relationship to that person who repeatedly consumes your content.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And I think that there are so many people who have shown up on my doorstep for coaching who have said, "Oh, I've been listening to your podcast And one of the things I have on kind of my perfect client list is they arrive at my door fully cooked, meaning they already have that know, like, and trust factor for me.
Sure.
And so I think that that's an amazing thing. So, okay, integrate. Let's pick that low-hanging fruit. How can our listeners leverage SEO to really expand their podcasts?
But that is a really great question, because right now, is at the time that we're recording this podcast, there's a upheaval, if you will, and Google has released a tremendous amount of upgrades in terms of how they're integrating AI into search. Search is becoming more important than ever, but also more complicated than ever. Artificial intelligence has come into the picture. And I think when ChatGPT first hit the scene and people were really getting a good dose of the abilities of artificial intelligence, there was this idea that perhaps that was going to impact podcasting in a negative way. But what we're seeing in the industry as a trend is that it's actually, podcasting is an amazing way for you to get visibility through SEO in ways that artificial intelligence actually supports. And what I mean by that is that due to the amount of curation of content in search right now, it's not, people aren't necessarily following the people that have the most followers as much as they're following the content that's important to them. So if you're continuing to put content out consistently over a broad spectrum, then you're more likely to show up in regular, just straight up traditionals. And it's funny that we're saying traditional SEO now versus what's impacted by AI. But the more you are subject matter expertise, the more important it is for you to be found in search with all of the significant impacts that AI is making in that particular area of business growth. The other thing to keep in mind is that when we are talking about that level of efficiency, when you're creating the podcast and you're putting it out there, there's some really simple things that you can do that you just take one step further after releasing your episode. And that's to make sure your episode titles, your descriptions, that they're all keyword optimized for search. But the thing that I think a lot of people really overlook, because podcasting has a lot of T's to cross, a lot of I's to dot, is how important the show notes are for your podcast.
Well, I'm
Yes. And
thinking these new bots, the AI driven things, they're going to scan all your show notes. So let's give an example. Let's say that you're a speaker who speaks on, I don't know, leadership authenticity, or some little word, some little phrase inside leadership. And then if you sprinkle leadership authenticity all through your show notes and somebody's looking for that, boom, now they're going to show up more quickly to you, right?
Right. Well, and I think for those who may not know exactly what show notes are, let's even give them that opportunity to really understand why they're so important. So a show note is essentially a summary of what we talk about. So for this podcast, for example, when you release this episode, you're going to have a summary of our conversation. It's going to have a description. It's going to have ideally keywords within that description.
Yeah.
But when you take it to the next level, you don't just want to do 2 or 3 sentences of Jane and Tracy talked about the benefits of podcasting for growing your speaking business.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Yeah.
You really want to have key takeaways,
bullet
points,
yes.
but then you also want to do timestamps as well.
Yes,
and
we do
2 or
those.
3 different timestamps, because you want to meet people where they are when they consume your content.
Yes.
And then of course, hashtags and bios of the guest and all of those things. So if someone's searching your name, someone's searching my name, you're more likely to be found because you've either guested on a podcast or you have your own podcast. And a lot of times people can get caught up in, well, my show notes don't really sound, they're not in my voice. And I love a quote that I borrow from the CEO of Blueberry, which is a hosting platform for podcasting. Todd Cochran says, create your content for your listener and your audience, write your show notes for Google. They're that important.
Ooh, that's a good quote. Monica, we can use that at the top of I love that hack, because that was something that I think we did all the things, we're doing all the things that you're mentioning, but now we can just do them more intentionally and really remember that we are creating those show notes for Google. That's
right. And there's another area that gets overlooked a lot. So with Produce Your Podcast, we're full service. So we will take your concept and walk you all the way through launch and get you live. So we're building the foundation of your show correctly from the beginning. But we also have a lot of people who find out about us. They come to us, they already have an existing podcast, but it's just not popping or growing the way that they're hoping. So we do a podcast audit for those types of clients. And one of the things that we find almost, I mean, the percentages are high, like in the 85% or higher of the podcast audits that we do, they're not optimizing the show description. So we talked about show notes for each individual episode, which is incredibly important because that's, you're uploading those to your website, you're putting fresh content, SEO, but your actual show description is uploaded when you launch your podcast.
Yes.
And so Apple alone will allow you to have up to 4,000 characters in your show description.
Okay.
Most show descriptions that we will see will be 120, 150 characters, which are the most important because they get truncated on Apple and Spotify.
Okay.
But you really want to optimize all of those characters. You want to different topics that you talk about on your podcast. If you've had high profile guests, put their names in your show description, your website in your show description, because people will find your podcast that way. And therefore they will discover you and what your area of expertise is. And Google will utilize those show descriptions when people search podcast. And one other thing that is not talked about a lot, but is important to know is that on Apple Podcasts specifically, you can only be found by the title of your show and the author tag, which is your name. So for example, you don't want to overload the title of your show with keywords, but the other thing that you don't need to do is include your own personal name in the title of your show, unless it is the Traci DeForge podcast. And in that case, of course, you would use your name. But if the name of your show is not your name, you can put that in the author tag and you're still going to be found and discovered. So when someone searches and they're looking for just your name, if they search your name in Google, then all of your the podcast episodes that you are guesting on, that you host yourself, those will come up as well. But you really want to use that, what we call oceanfront real estate, for the name of your show and for the name and titles of your episodes to really be something. If you just think about the easiest way to do it without even knowing anything about SEO is, if I was going to search for this episode, what would I put in? And then just keep it easy on yourself, but just be mindful that the cutesy kind of fun, like it's so fun to be creative, but that's not going to serve you in terms of being found. So you really want those episode titles and those episode descriptions to be robust in that way.
Clear over clever. We'll take clear over clever any day. And the gold right there was the show description, 4,000 characters, that many of us have not used significantly to our advantage. I know that we have a lot of listeners who will be heading right out to Apple to check and see whether or not they're taking advantage. And I love the idea of name dropping there, just putting a whole bunch of keywords right in that 4,000 characters. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, you say your podcast can be the centerpiece of your content marketing strategy. Say more about that.
Well, I think it's like, if you think about a wheel with spokes coming out of it, that's the best visual to be able to really get you honed in on. Is like, it's similar to what we were talking about. And then in the second takeaway of why it's important to have a podcast is because you are investing your time, your resources, your energy, you're reaching out to guests, you're bringing them in. There's a lot of work that goes involved into your podcast creation, that alone, but also you're having conversations, you're creating content in a way that's easy for you, especially if you're a speaker. It's like, that is the best way to create content because you're typically used to being on stages, having a mic in front of you. You're used to, entertaining and educating audiences. So the podcast is such a natural transition of that for you. Yes. You may not be adept at possibly writing blog posts, or maybe you're just dying to get that book out because you know it's going to support your speaking business, but you just haven't gotten around to it, right? So just that alone, we work with several people have podcasts, and they start their podcast because they ultimately want to write a book. So they are doing two things. They're building their audience through their podcast. So when the book comes out, they have this opportunity to market the book to an already existing fans and followers. But even more so, they're creating their content spontaneously, and they're not having to deal with writer's block and all of those things that can bog you down, or procrastination for that matter. And then taking that again in terms of repurposing content, you are a content generating machine by recording the episode once and having all of these social media posts, blog posts, the show notes, like we were talking about, all of these opportunities to put that content in front of a wider audience that might not be able to discover it if you hadn't been marketing yourself in that way.
Beautiful. Now, we talked a little bit at the top of the show about a call to action. What do you think is an effective CTA for podcasters? I know that this is something that I'm not the best at, for sure. In fact, I am so low key on my podcast and low sales on my podcast that I probably miss the opportunity on almost every show. So bad me. Do not do what I do, everybody. I am a bad example on this front. So tell us what you think is a good call to action.
Well, I love what you said. We're all human. It's sometimes the call to action, again, it's something that can be easily overlooked if you're not really thinking or focused on it. In fact, we have a client, 7-figure consultant, who is her primary business is working with entrepreneurs who are wanting to break that 7-figure business revenue goal. And she had been doing her podcast for several years, and we worked with her to tweak her call to action. When I say tweak her call to action, I meant a very specific request for people to continue the conversation with her after the show. However, what we discovered is there was nothing inside of her podcast where she was ever talking about what she actually did. So she had amazing guests. She had amazing people on her show. So there's a phrase that I typically say a lot, and I have to say it slowly so I get it accurately, because I can often get it reversed. But it is that we underestimate the number of people that we know, and we overestimate the number of people who know what we do. And so when you are thinking in terms of your podcast, you can't assume that everyone knows you have a podcast, that everyone knows what your podcast is for, that everyone even knows what you're doing in your business. Yes. and who your target customer is. And never underestimate that there are people that you can put messaging out there to and invite people to listen to the show who may know somebody who knows somebody. But to circle back to the 7-figure consultant, we integrated into the open of her show a more specific, direct statement about what it is that she does for a living. And then she had a call to action at the end of the show that was like, if you would like to work with me, and then her call to action. And within like the first 2 or 3 episodes from when she made that change, she closed a 5-figure coaching client. And they said to her, and I'm not exaggerating, they said, I've been listening to your podcast for years, but I never really understood exactly what it was that you did. But as soon as I heard you say that, I knew you would be great for me. So that's just one example, right? So, but to give you a specific kind of tactical advice on a call to action, we do have Produce Your Podcast has a special sauce, if you will, in terms of a call to action. Because I was talking earlier about how important it is to be able to connect with your audience in a way that's really personal to you, because it's a relationship that you're building with that person, whether you have 100 listeners or 100,000 listeners or a million listeners, you need to deliver that call to action like you're talking to one person. So you want to say, I would love it if you would go to my, it's that warm invite call to action where you are just making a specific point to say, I would really like to connect with you on LinkedIn. DM me if you have any questions. Like, those are the kind of calls to action, as opposed to sign up for my newsletter or follow me on Instagram. Like, they're not personal. And you have such an opportunity as a podcaster to create a personal relationship with a call to action that feels natural, just like you're having a conversation at a cocktail party or on a soccer field or in an outside a conference room at a business conference.
Yeah, I like that. Now, one of the things that podcasting has done is it's taken the listeners they're not in our database. So pulling them into our database, is there a good, I know we can have a lead magnet or something that we offer every once in a while. Is it too much to offer something once a quarter or something like that?
No, I love that question because it really takes the call to action recipe, if you will, to another level. Because if there's a two-part opportunity with a call to action, that warm invite call to action that I just gave you an example of, that's something you can do each time you record your show. So if your call to action changes, if you're hosting an event, if you're going to be releasing a book, if you have a special ebook or an opt-in, or if you want people to come along with you in your journey of writing your book and they want to download the first chapter, those are things that you can update as you record your episode, and they're not locked in stone, for example. But we also recommend that you have a recorded close that's a voiceover and a music bed that's separate than yours when you close the podcast. And inside that can be what we call an evergreen call to action. So I was being somewhat flippant when I said, sign up for my newsletter. That's not the warm invite is not the real estate where you want to do that, unless you're saying something to the effect of, I am working so hard on this amazing newsletter that is packed full of really tactical tips. And if you loved what I said about this call to action, you're really going to want to sign up for my newsletter because it's more like this. Like it's what's in it for them, right? To give you that email. If you're using your call to action to promote other things, use the evergreen call to action, which means it never changes. It's always in the recorded voiceover. It's a memory recognition at the recorded close that says, go to our website and sign up for our newsletter. So I'm giving you all my tricks, but here's another one, which is if your website URL where you're having your opt-in or where you're having people go to sign up for your newsletter is different than the name of your podcast, stop what you're doing right now and go to GoDaddy or wherever you buy your URLs and buy the name of your podcast as a URL and redirect it to your website. Because people find you by the name of your show and you might have a completely different URL for your business. And they're thinking of you and the name of your show. They're not thinking of whatever the URL is for your business. So it's such an easy, it's like $10 or less, and it's free to forward it. And so make sure you're guiding people to a URL that's in the same name of your show.
So good. That is more gold. Oh my gosh, you're really laying it down. And if you're at all kind of like squeamish about asking for the sale or whatever, a topper and a tail, I call them being topped and tailed. I don't know. I forget what the actual language is, but having it pre-recorded on the beginning and the finish of your show makes it so much easier. It really takes it out of your hands. And I love that. Okay, so final question. Growing your audience by being on what I call OPPs, other people's podcasts. What, talk about that and some good ways to do it.
Well, I mean, I probably couldn't give you a better example than what we've done today in terms of having a conversation. Everything that I shared with you is what we share with our clients, either when they come and set up a call with us that they just want to find out information about our services or how we work. It's really important to me to have a time where you can just ask questions where you don't feel like it's a huge pitch. But that and word of mouth referrals are amazing for Produce Your Podcast, but they're slower, right? So when I have the opportunity to be on a podcast and you and I have this opportunity to have just a literal conversation about things that I can share that can help you and help your audience, then I'm benefiting from just being able to share my expertise and give back. But at the same time, I'm introducing myself to your audience who may never have even heard of me or heard of Produce Your Podcast. And then if you're in a situation with your podcast right now where you're stuck or you're stagnant or it's not growing, or you have always wanted to start one, but you had no idea where to start, now you have a friend in the podcasting business as a result of me guesting on your podcast. And so if you take that story and you take out my name and the name of my business and my area of expertise and you insert yours, you get the exact same results. And so it's absolutely worth your time. And I think time management with podcasting is a very important thing to talk about, because here you are now. Okay, you're telling me I have to host my own show, and then I have to guest on other people's show, and then I've got to repurpose the content, and I've got to write show notes. Like, that's why it's important to really look at time blocking and ideally aligning with the right partner for you to really support you in a way that all you have to focus on is just showing up and creating your content.
Yeah. And I want people to know that you showed up on my doorstep, right time, right place, right topic. If it wasn't the right topic for my audience, we wouldn't have continued on the conversation. But because it was, okay, tell me more. And it's when people show up on my doorstep pitching me start your own podcast services. Well, they haven't done their homework to find out that I already have a podcast, or write your first book. Well, I have 6 books, people. Like, let's do a little research before you actually pitch me your
100%.
Please find out if you have my service already. So let's make sure that you're speaking to the what's in it for them, and make sure that what you are offering is something that would be of validity for their audience. And I would do a very quick pitch. Hey, is this topic of interest? That's how I roll. And that's how we kind of do a lot of really quick queries with our clients is this topic of interest for your podcast? If so, let's proceed to step 2. So, but I really liked how you did it, and well done. And here we are. So let's tell everybody where they should get in touch with you.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to drink my own Kool-Aid and take my own medicine. So if you're listening to this podcast and you would like to find out more about how to grow your show or start a show or take your existing show to the next level, I would love it if you would connect with me at produceyourpodcast.com. Our website is full of a resource library of blogs. We have portfolios of shows that you can check out our work. There's opportunities to schedule a call to ask any questions, and a contact form. So it really can give you you can start where you are at any point with our website at produceyourpodcast.com.
Beautiful. And we'll be sure to put that in the show notes as well. I want to say thank you, Traci, for being with us here today. You have dropped a ton of really, really juicy nuggets. So thank you so much. That was excellent. I'm so glad that we, raised our hand and said, let's do this. For those of you listening, hey, here's my ask for you. I'm taking Traci's advice.
I love it.
I would like to know, I hear from so many people out there who have been on my show. Oh, I can't believe all the feedback I've gotten from being on your show. And I would like to personally hear from you. So let's do it this way. Go out and find me, please, on LinkedIn and connect with me. And I would like to hear something about the podcast in the connection, and let us know what you think. What has been resonating? Maybe you have some ideas for future podcasts. I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much for doing that in advance. And thank you so much, Traci DeForge, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. It was a fantastic conversation.
And with that, we're going to say, see you soon, wealthy speakers. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. If you need help building the speaking business of your dreams, head over to wealthyspeakerschool.com and take advantage of our 20-minute next step call. Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast.